You think your grandmother's recipes are safe because you remember how they tasted? Think again. Across Black America, entire culinary traditions are vanishing. Not because we stopped cooking, but because nobody wrote them down. Let's dig into 30 recipes we're losing forever. Shepherd's pie with mashed sweet potatoes was a clever twist on an old classic that fit the budget of Black families in the 1960s. Instead of pricey white potatoes, sweet potatoes from the garden were boiled, mashed, and spread on top of a filling made from scraps of meat and vegetables. My grandmother would use whatever was left, bits of beef, chicken, or even pork, chopped small and cooked with onions, carrots, or peas until it formed a savory base. The sweet potato topping baked into a golden layer that balanced the salty meat with a touch of natural sweetness. It was hearty enough to fill everyone, but cheap enough to make even during lean weeks. Sweet potatoes were plentiful in many southern gardens, and they stretched farther than most vegetables because they were filling and rich in flavor. Shepherd's pie with mashed sweet potatoes was more than just food. It was a statement of ingenuity. Families made do with what they had and still put something warm and comforting on the table. That golden crust represented thrift and care, carrying both survival and love in every spoonful. Ramen noodles with hot sauce and eggs might sound simple, but for many families in the 1970s, it was a miracle in a bowl. A few packs could feed everyone, and all it needed was water, fire, and imagination. The noodles curled in the pot, soaking up every bit of spice and salt, while the eggs dropped in and turned silky. Hot sauce gave it life, that fiery bite that cut through the sameness of struggle. It was quick, cheap, and hot, a meal that tasted like satisfaction. The whole house smelled faintly of pepper and pride. People called it poor folks' comfort food, but it was clever too, proof that creativity beats money any day. When you had nothing but still made something good, you learned to see joy in the smallest things. That bowl was proof that flavor, like hope, could always be stretched. Shepherd's pie with creamed corn was one of those dinners that brought everyone to the table just by existing. Families layered it differently depending on what they had, but the pattern was always roughly the same. A savory meat base, a layer of creamed corn, and a cloud of mashed potatoes spread across the top like a soft, warm blanket. It baked into a bubbling, golden-topped dish that felt like comfort scooped straight from the oven. The creamed corn added sweetness and richness that balanced the meat perfectly, turning each bite into a blend of textures and flavors that tasted far more complicated than it really was. Kids loved digging through the layers, adults loved how far it could stretch when money was tight, and everyone loved how one pan could feed an entire family without anyone feeling shortchanged. It was a dish shaped by personality, by whatever seasonings happened to be nearby, by the quiet creativity of home cooking. Even now, people crave it because it represents a whole world of warmth, routine, and togetherness tucked beneath a layer of mashed potatoes. Stewed chicken gizzards were one of the most economical meals mothers turned to when they needed something hearty but inexpensive. Gizzards were sold in small bags for almost nothing. Tough at first, but full of flavor when given time, mothers cleaned them thoroughly, then simmered them with onions, celery, and broth until they softened into tender bites. The stew thickened slowly, filling the air with rich aromas that signaled dinner was near. Sometimes mothers added a little flour to make a thicker gravy, perfect for spooning over rice or mashed potatoes. Children often stared curiously at the gizzards, unsure at first, but one taste of the silky gravy and tender meat changed minds quickly. The dish was warming, comforting, and surprisingly filling. Stewed chicken gizzards turned one of the most overlooked cuts into a bowl of nourishment that kept families steady through long weeks. Leftover turkey sandwiches planned from the beginning ensured that Thanksgiving dinner stretched into multiple meals, with mothers deliberately cooking extra, knowing that day-after sandwiches were part of the tradition. When families could afford turkey, Black mothers bought the smallest birds that would serve immediate needs while leaving enough for sandwiches. The leftover meat was sliced thin and layered on homemade biscuits or potato rolls with mayonnaise and cranberry sauce, creating sandwiches that tasted almost as good as the original meal. Children actually preferred these casual sandwiches to formal sit-down dinners, eating them while watching television. Adults appreciated how turkey sandwiches extended the Thanksgiving experience without requiring additional cooking. This planned-overs approach represented forward thinking that characterized Black household management during difficult times, ensuring maximum value. Cream chip potatoes were a full dinner disguised as a side dish, something families made when the pantry was nearly empty, but the expectation of a warm meal still stood. Potatoes were sliced, boiled until just soft, then folded into a simple cream sauce that turned everything silky and comforting. It was not flashy or colorful, but it was filling, warm, and dependable. The sauce coated every piece, turning the dish into a milky, tender scoop of pure comfort that tasted far richer than its ingredients suggested. Families served it on its own or with a biscuit or two, letting the potatoes carry the whole meal. Kids often underestimated it until they took a bite, only to realize how satisfying it was. Adults relied on it because it stretched ingredients beautifully. Even today, the memory of those creamy potatoes lingers because it was the kind of food that kept people going with nothing more than simplicity and care. Giblet gravy poured over everything at Black church Christmas dinners, its rich brown color and complex flavor elevating even the simplest dishes into something special. The gravy began with the giblets, heart, liver, and gizzard, simmered in broth with onions, celery, and bay leaves until tender enough to chop fine. The cooking liquid became the base, thickened with a roux of flour and pan drippings from whatever meat had been roasted that day. Church mothers stirred constantly to prevent lumps, adjusting seasoning with salt, pepper, and sometimes a splash of Worcestershire sauce for depth. The chopped giblets were stirred back in, adding texture and concentrated flavor to every ladleful. This gravy tied the entire Christmas plate together, poured over cornbread dressing, rice, and sliced turkey or ham alike. Nothing was wasted in its making, and nothing on the plate was considered complete without it. Giblet gravy represented the philosophy of Black Southern cooking. Use everything, waste nothing, and make it delicious. Deviled eggs made with extra mayonnaise and pickle juice stretched expensive eggs into appetizers that fed crowds while adding protein to meals that sometimes lacked adequate meat. Black mothers would hard-boil dozens of eggs when they went on sale, carefully peeling them and mixing the yolks with mayonnaise, mustard, pickle juice, and paprika until smooth and tangy. The pickle juice was key, adding flavor dimension while helping the filling stay moist and spreadable without requiring extra mayonnaise. Each egg half became a small, protein-rich bite that satisfied hunger while looking festive and deliberate on serving platters. Children loved deviled eggs because they were handheld and mild, while adults appreciated their versatility as appetizer, side dish, or even light main course when other food ran short. A dozen eggs could be transformed into 24 servings, making them remarkably economical for their protein content. The eggs could be prepared the day before Thanksgiving. Chicken and rice soup with saltines was the gentle dinner families turned to when someone was sick, tired, or simply needed a bowl of something soothing. The broth simmered with small bits of chicken, soft rice, celery, and carrots until everything blended into a warm, mild mixture that felt healing in every spoonful. Kids crumbled saltines over the top, watching them soften into the broth while adding just enough salt to wake up the flavor. The soup filled the house with a soft, comforting smell that signaled everyone to slow down. It was not a fancy meal, but it was one that carried emotional weight, something parents made with quiet intention. On cold nights, it warmed you from the inside out. On stressful days, it felt like a reset button. Even now, the memory of that simple soup can bring back the feeling of being wrapped in a blanket with the television humming softly in the background. It was the taste of gentleness, patience, and the kind of love that shows up in small, steady ways. Red gravy rice bowls were the kind of quick, filling meal mothers made on nights when time and money were both running thin. Red gravy was not the fancy kind found in restaurants, but a simple tomato-based sauce cooked with onions, seasoning, and whatever bits of leftover fat or meat were available. It simmered until the onions softened and the flavors blended into something far more satisfying than its ingredients suggested. Some mothers added a pinch of sugar to balance the acidity, while others stirred in a spoonful of flour to thicken it just enough to cling to the rice. The pot bubbled gently on the stove, sending out a warm smell that wrapped the house in comfort long before dinner was served. Mothers spooned it generously over fresh rice, letting the sauce seep into every grain. Children dug in eagerly, blowing on each bite because they never waited long enough for it to cool. They loved how the rice soaked up the sauce, turning a handful of cheap staples into something that tasted whole. It was cheap, warm, and grounding in a way only comfort food can be. Red gravy rice bowls tasted like resilience, the kind families depended on. Macaroni with evaporated milk was the humble cousin of mac and cheese, made without luxury but with all the heart. Families mixed boiled pasta with a can of milk, a pinch of salt, and maybe a bit of butter if they could spare it. It thickened into a creamy dish that looked rich even when it was not. Some stirred in black pepper or dried herbs to make it special. It was a dish made to stretch, to fill bellies without breaking budgets. Children never cared that it lacked real cheese. To them, it was just good. For parents, it was a reminder that love could turn even a bare pantry into something that tasted like comfort. In small kitchens, mothers stirred the pot with quiet pride, knowing they were making something that would last until payday. The smell was gentle but comforting, warm like a promise that hunger would have to wait. The sound of spoons clinking in metal bowls was its own kind of music. Families gathered close, sharing laughter over a meal that cost next to nothing but meant everything. It was proof that simplicity could still taste like home, that love could flavor even the plainest food. Ham bone soup with vegetables was one of those meals where one piece of meat flavored an entire pot. A single ham bone, stripped of most of its meat, simmered for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes until the broth turned rich and smoky. My grandmother would add beans or greens if she had them, letting the flavors meld into something far more substantial than the ingredients suggested. Families gathered around steaming bowls, dipping bread into the broth and savoring the flavor the bone had left behind. It was frugal cooking at its finest, taking scraps and stretching them into nourishment. The soup fed many mouths, warmed cold nights, and made do with what was available. In the 1960s, when meat was costly, a ham bone could be the centerpiece of dinner, proving that thrift and patience could coax flavor out of nearly anything. Ham bone soup with vegetables carried both practicality and comfort in every ladleful. Tomato okra rice stew, sometimes called country stew, was a dish built from the garden and the pantry, relying on vegetables and rice instead of meat. Mothers combined canned tomatoes, fresh or frozen okra, onions, and seasonings in a large pot, letting everything soften into a thick, spoonable stew. A little garlic or hot pepper was added when available, giving the pot a gentle heat that made it even more satisfying. Rice was added to stretch the meal, swelling as it absorbed the tomato broth. The mixture simmered for a long time, sending up warm, familiar scents that wrapped the house in comfort. Children gathered near the stove, lifting the lid even when told not to, eager to see the bubbling stew. Kids loved its bright flavor and soft texture, especially when paired with cornbread. They learned early that vegetables could stand on their own when seasoned with care. It was a filling dinner made from the most basic ingredients, yet it never felt lacking. Tomato okra rice stew was proof that even plant-based meals could feel rich. Sloppy joes on soft white buns were the messy miracle of school nights everywhere. Ground beef simmered in a sweet, tangy sauce until it thickened into that unmistakable mixture that dripped out of the bun no matter how carefully you tried to hold it. The smell alone meant excitement, because sloppy joes felt fun in a way few dinners did. Kids loved the chaos, parents loved the convenience, and everyone loved how satisfying it was. The softness of the bun, the sweetness of the sauce, the savory meat all came together in a way that still makes people nostalgic decades later. It was a dinner that tasted like childhood laughter, like sticky hands, like evenings where life felt uncomplicated and full. And there was always this unspoken ritual to it, the way families leaned over their plates to avoid dropping sauce everywhere and still managed to make a small mess anyway. That was part of the charm. Sloppy Joes brought everyone to the table faster than anything else, and for a brief moment the whole house felt connected by something simple and warm. Giblet gravy made from turkey or chicken organ meats transformed parts that many discarded into rich, flavorful sauce that elevated every dish it touched. When families could afford even a small bird, Black mothers saved the neck, liver, heart, and gizzard, chopping them fine and simmering them with onions and celery until tender. The organs added depth and richness that plain flour gravy could never match, creating sauce with body and complexity that tasted like hours of work. Some women strained out the meat pieces for texture-sensitive children, while others left everything in for those who appreciated authentic preparations. The gravy was thickened with flour mixed into the drippings, creating perfect consistency that coated everything without being gluey. Poured over dressing, mashed potatoes, rice, or biscuits, giblet gravy made every component taste richer. This was resourceful cooking at its finest, using parts that cost nothing extra. Chicken and rice soup with saltines was the gentle dinner families turned to when someone was sick, tired, or simply needed a bowl of something soothing. The broth simmered with small bits of chicken, soft rice, celery, and carrots until everything blended into a warm, mild mixture that felt healing in every spoonful. Kids crumbled saltines over the top, watching them soften into the broth while adding just enough salt to wake up the flavor. The soup filled the house with a soft, comforting smell that signaled everyone to slow down. It was not a fancy meal, but it was one that carried emotional weight, something parents made with quiet intention. On cold nights, it warmed you from the inside out. On stressful days, it felt like a reset button. Even now, the memory of that simple soup can bring back the feeling of being wrapped in a blanket with the television humming softly in the background. It was the taste of gentleness, patience, and the kind of love that shows up in small, steady ways. Rutabagas mashed with butter appeared at Black church Christmas dinners as a humble root vegetable transformed into something elegant through patient cooking and generous seasoning. The large purple-topped roots were peeled, cubed, and boiled until tender enough to mash smooth, then whipped with butter, salt, pepper, and sometimes brown sugar to balance their earthiness. Church mothers who grew rutabagas considered them essential winter fare, hearty vegetables that stored well and provided nourishment when little else was available. The mashed rutabagas were served alongside candied yams and collard greens, their pale yellow color providing contrast on plates dominated by darker dishes. Children often approached them with suspicion, but those who tasted them discovered a flavor both sweet and savory that complemented holiday meats perfectly. Rutabagas represented the practical wisdom of Southern cooking, growing what thrived in poor soil and transforming it into something worth celebrating. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches, warm or fried, were the quiet heroes of tight-budget nights when families needed something filling, sweet, and comforting. Bananas were mashed or sliced, spread across bread with a thick layer of peanut butter that stuck to the roof of your mouth in the best possible way. Sometimes the sandwich was served cold, simple, and soft. Other nights it was placed in a skillet with a bit of butter and fried until the bread turned golden and the filling melted into a warm, gooey mixture that tasted almost like dessert. The smell of toasted bread and sweet banana drifted through the house, reminding everyone that a good meal did not have to be complicated. Kids devoured these sandwiches without realizing they were eating one of the most budget-friendly dinners imaginable. Adults appreciated how quickly they came together on nights when energy was low and money was stretched thin. Even now, people crave that comforting blend of nutty, creamy sweetness because it tastes like childhood kindness, like the soft end of a long day, like something made with care during tougher times. It was simple, warm, and unforgettable. Fried cabbage cooked with bacon ends became the vegetable side that tasted rich and satisfying despite costing almost nothing, transforming humble cruciferous vegetable into something people craved. Black mothers would shred cabbage from heads that cost less than 50 cents, then cook it slowly with bacon ends saved from breakfast preparations. The bacon fat and small meat pieces flavored the entire pot of cabbage, making it taste indulgent despite being mostly vegetable. Some women added onions for sweetness and complexity, while others kept it simple with just cabbage, bacon, and salt. The cabbage cooked down significantly, meaning one head could feed 8 to 10 people. Children who normally avoided vegetables would eat fried cabbage because it tasted bacony and rich. This dish represented the kind of flavor alchemy that Black cooks perfected through generations of making inexpensive ingredients taste expensive. Fried haddock with tartar sauce was the Friday night ritual that made the end of the week feel special even when money was tight. Families bought haddock because it was affordable, mild, and easy to cook, the kind of fish even picky kids would eat without a fight. The fillets were dusted with flour or dipped in a simple batter, then lowered gently into hot oil where they crisped into a golden, flaky piece of comfort. The sound of frying filled the kitchen with the promise of something warm and satisfying. Tartar sauce, usually made from mayonnaise and chopped pickles, added a creamy tang that made the whole plate taste like a restaurant meal without the cost of going out. Kids loved how the crust crackled when they bit into it. Adults loved how reliable and filling it was after a long week. Sometimes it came with a side of coleslaw or potatoes, but the fish was always the star. The meal felt like a small celebration, a tiny break from the routine, something that said you made it through another week. Even now, people crave that simple plate because it carried a sense of comfort, tradition, and the steady rhythm of family life. Fried haddock dinners tasted like warmth, togetherness, and the peaceful feeling of a Friday evening that asked nothing more of you. Canned salmon croquettes were one of the most beloved budget dinners because they turned a cheap can of fish into something that felt almost fancy. Mothers mixed the salmon with onions, cornmeal or breadcrumbs, eggs, and simple seasonings, shaping the mixture into patties. When they hit the hot skillet, the croquettes sizzled loudly, signaling that dinner would be crisp and golden. The outside browned beautifully, while the inside stayed soft and savory. Sometimes mothers squeezed in a bit of lemon or added chopped peppers when they had extra ingredients, elevating the dish even further. Served with rice, potatoes, or plain bread, the croquettes stretched one can far enough to feed several children. The smell drifted through the house, making everyone hungry long before the meal was served. Kids especially loved the way the crispy coating gave way to the tender filling. Canned salmon croquettes were frugality turned into celebration. Fried hot dogs and rice were the clever man's version of sausage and grains, a dish born straight from necessity. One pack of hot dogs could stretch across 3 or 4 dinners if you sliced them right. Fried in a skillet until golden and crisp at the edges, the pieces were tossed into fluffy white rice seasoned with whatever was around: salt, pepper, maybe a touch of hot sauce. The sound of the skillet was quick and cheerful, the kind of noise that made a small kitchen feel like a celebration. It was cheap, filling, and came together in minutes after long workdays. Kids loved it because it looked fun, and parents loved it because it filled everyone without breaking the budget. Leftovers were rare because no one ever left a bite behind. It was proof that even the simplest food could still feel like comfort. Fried hot dogs and rice may not have been fancy, but in its sizzling, smoky way, it gave families a taste of joy on the hardest nights. Sweet corn and onion skillet was the kind of dish that came together quickly, made from what the garden and pantry had to offer. Fresh ears of corn, or sometimes canned when the season had passed, were sliced from the cob and tossed into a hot pan with sliced onions. Lard or bacon fat did the work of bringing flavor, sizzling until the onions browned and the corn caramelized. The smell was sweet and smoky, filling the house with a promise of comfort even before the first bite. It was cheap, it was fast, and it was nourishing, the kind of supper that stretched across countless families trying to make ends meet. My grandmother served it with bread or cornbread, letting the skillet's juices soak into every bite. The simplicity was its strength, just vegetables and fat, transformed into something more than the sum of its parts. Sweet corn and onion skillet reminded everyone that even with little, you could still eat well. Fried cabbage and potatoes was the smell of thrift and warmth rolled into one. The sizzle of sliced potatoes hitting the skillet mingled with the sound of cabbage crackling as it softened. It was a poor man's stir-fry, made with nothing fancy but full of flavor. Sometimes bacon grease or a strip of fatback turned the whole thing smoky, rich, and satisfying. The meal came together fast, just a handful of ingredients, but it fed everyone around the table. Children knew this dinner meant it was almost payday, when everything left in the pantry came together for one last meal. It was humble food, but every bite was seasoned with care. What made it special was not what it cost, but the way it could make a home feel full again, even when the shelves were bare. The pan clattered, the scent rose, and people gathered close without being called. The potatoes browned to perfection, the cabbage wilted into silk, and suddenly poverty felt far away. The laughter that filled the room tasted better than any feast. Fried cabbage and potatoes might not have been much to look at, but it carried dignity in every bite. It turned scraps into satisfaction and made sure no one went to bed hungry. Soya grits and ground beef skillet dinners were a product of the government era, when soy-based foods were sent to low-income households to stretch meat supplies. Mothers browned a small amount of beef, added the soya grits, and seasoned everything until it tasted far richer than it looked. Sometimes a handful of onions or peppers went in, or a bit of leftover broth to deepen the flavor. The mixture thickened into a hearty skillet meal that fed many children at once. Kids did not always know what was in it, but they knew it filled them up and tasted good with bread or rice. It had a creamy, savory texture that surprised families the first time they tried it. Mothers relied on it because it was reliable, cheap, and easy to adapt. Soya grits and ground beef skillets were resourcefulness at its most practical, proof that mothers could turn even government-issued ingredients into comfort. Baked chicken legs with paprika were the kind of simple oven meal every family seemed to know by heart. The chicken legs were seasoned with salt, pepper, and a heavy dusting of paprika that turned the skin a deep red as it baked. They cooked low and slow, filling the house with that unmistakable smell of roasted chicken that drifted through every room. The skin crisped just enough, the meat stayed juicy, and the seasoning tasted familiar and warm. Families served it with mashed potatoes, rice, or whatever vegetable was around that week, but the chicken always stole the show. It was inexpensive, reliable, and delicious, the kind of dish that never tried too hard but always delivered. Kids grabbed it with both hands, adults savored the flavor, and everybody ended up licking their fingers. Even now, people crave that paprika-dusted chicken because it tasted like family, like evening routines, like the kind of homemade meal that anchors a childhood. Spam and fried potatoes was the sort of meal that turned thrift into something craveable. Spam cubes hit the skillet with a hiss, browning into salty, crispy little bites that tasted far richer than their priced potatoes sliced thin and cooked alongside them soaked up every bit of flavor, turning golden at the edges and soft in the center. It was a skillet meal that came together fast, fed everyone well, and filled the house with a smell that was impossible to forget. Families made it because it was easy, cheap, and satisfying, but they kept making it because it tasted like home. The combination of textures, the crackle of the potatoes, and the deep, savory bite of the spam all worked together better than anyone expected. Kids saw it as a treat, adults saw it as practical, and everyone saw it as a kind of magic born from a can in a pan. Even today, people crave it because it tasted like childhood, like simpler times, and like pure comfort. Carrot and raisin salad made with minimal mayonnaise became the sweet, crunchy side dish that added color and nutrition without requiring cooking or expensive ingredients. Black mothers would buy carrots by the bag when on sale, shredding them by hand or with graters borrowed from neighbors, then mixing them with raisins that provided natural sweetness. The mayonnaise was used sparingly, just enough to coat everything, while lemon juice or vinegar added brightness. This cold salad was perfect for crowded refrigerators since it took up little space and actually tasted better after sitting overnight. Children loved the sweetness from raisins and the satisfying crunch of fresh carrots, making it one of the few vegetable dishes that didn't require cajoling. Adults appreciated its versatility, serving it as side dish, light dessert, or even breakfast the next morning. Carrot and raisin salad proved that simple combinations of affordable ingredients could create dishes that delighted across generations. Potato salad held sacred status at Black church Christmas dinners, and every church mother believed her recipe was the definitive version. The potatoes were boiled until just tender, never mushy. then cubed and mixed while still warm so they would absorb the dressing better. Mayonnaise formed the base, but the additions varied by family tradition. Mustard for tang, sweet pickle relish for brightness, hard-boiled eggs for richness, celery for crunch, and sometimes a touch of sugar to balance the acid. Paprika was sprinkled across the top like a blessing, its red color signaling that this dish had been prepared with care. The salad was made the day before and refrigerated overnight, allowing the flavors to meld into something greater than the sum of their parts. Arguments about the proper texture, creamy versus chunky, divided congregations more than any theological debate. Children would sneak spoonfuls before dinner was served, and adults judged the quality of the entire Christmas spread by the first bite of potato salad. Hot dogs and pork and beans were the kind of quick dinner families relied on when nights were too busy for anything else. The beans simmered until they thickened, turning sweet and smoky, while sliced hot dogs added enough salt and substance to make the whole meal feel complete. It was simple, cheap, and surprisingly satisfying, the kind of dinner kids hurried toward when they heard the can opener turning. It tasted like television nights, homework half done, and the comfortable chaos of family life. Even now, people crave it because it brings back a feeling of uncomplicated joy. The flavor was familiar and predictable in the best way. A warm little bowl that asked nothing of you except to sit down and enjoy it. Parents liked that it came together in minutes, and kids liked that it felt like a treat, even though it was one of the easiest meals in the house. It was a dish woven into weeknights, routines, and the small moments that ended long days with something warm and steady. Okra and tomato skillet dinners were a celebration of what could be grown, canned, or shared when grocery money was scarce. Okra came from backyard gardens or neighbors who always had extra to give canned tomatoes added brightness and acidity that turned the dish into something filling and hearty. Mothers seasoned it with onions, garlic, and pepper, letting the vegetables stew down until they became thick and deeply flavored. Sometimes a pinch of sugar or paprika went in, just to balance the tang or add warmth. The skillet hissed softly as everything cooked, filling the room with the smell of tomatoes and earth. Sometimes it was served over rice, sometimes with cornbread, and sometimes as the meal all on its own. Children learned early that vegetables could carry a dinner when meat was not part of the budget. They would scoop big spoonfuls onto their plates, pleased by how comforting and familiar it tasted. Okra and tomato skillet meals were proof that survival could still taste good. Sweet potatoes and white bread supper was simple, sweet, and sacred in its own way. When sugar was scarce, this pairing filled the gap between dinner and dessert. Sweet potatoes were roasted or boiled until soft and mashed, then spread across slices of white bread still warm from the toaster. Sometimes a bit of butter or syrup was added, if luck or paychecks allowed. The flavor was rich but humble, sweet enough to satisfy and hearty enough to last through the night. It was the kind of meal that carried memories of holidays and home, even on the hardest days. Families sat around small tables, sharing what little they had, and somehow it always felt like plenty. It was a quiet joy, born from making sweetness out of struggle, a reminder that love could turn even two simple foods into comfort. The smell of roasted sweet potatoes would drift through the house, thick and warm like a promise. Some ate it slowly, savoring every bite, while others devoured it like it was cake. There was no shame in it, just satisfaction. That humble meal was more than food. It was proof that something as ordinary as a potato and bread could taste like care, and sometimes that was enough to keep hope alive. Barbecue pig ears were a dish that showed how deeply rooted thrift and tradition were in Black cooking. Pig ears were among the cheapest cuts, often discarded or sold for pennies at butcher shops. My grandmother cleaned them carefully, simmered them until tender, and then finished them with homemade barbecue sauce that clung to every bite. The texture was chewy but flavorful, and paired with cornbread or greens, it became a meal that carried both satisfaction and culture. Families gathered around plates of pig ears during weekends or special occasions, treating them as a delicacy despite their humble beginnings. The sauce was smoky, tangy, and rich, masking the simplicity of the cut with layers of flavor. Eating barbecue pig ears was about more than just nourishment. It was about making something from nothing, about honoring traditions that valued every part of the animal. In the 1960s, dishes like this kept families connected to heritage and survival alike. Barbecue pig ears turned scraps into a meal that was cheap but never forgotten. Fried fatback with wilted greens was a dinner that stretched almost nothing into something satisfying. Fatback was cheap, salty, and often the only pork a household could afford, but its flavor went a long way. Mothers sliced it into thin pieces and fried them in a hot skillet until the edges curled and turned golden. The rendered fat was then used to cook mustard or collard greens, softening them into a tender, silky pile that tasted deeply seasoned even without meat. Sometimes mothers added a splash of vinegar or a pinch of sugar to balance the sharpness of the greens, turning the pot into something even more comforting. The sizzle of the fatback and the sharp smell of the greens mixed together in a way that pulled children toward the kitchen. They waited near the stove, hoping for a crispy piece fresh from the pan, knowing it might be the only meat they tasted that night. A single piece of fatback on the plate felt like a treat, even though it cost almost nothing. The greens wilted perfectly in the hot pan, absorbing every bit of flavor left behind. Mothers served big portions because greens filled the belly and kept everyone satisfied. It was a simple meal, but it fed the whole family. Fried fatback with wilted greens was resourcefulness turned into tradition. Mashed potato pancakes were the kind of thrifty dinner that made last night's leftovers taste brand new again. Families mixed cold mashed potatoes with a little flour, egg, and seasoning, shaping them into patties that went straight into a hot skillet. As they browned, the edges crisped into a golden crust, while the inside stayed soft and creamy, a perfect contrast that made each bite feel special. The smell of frying potatoes curled through the kitchen, bringing everyone to the table before the first batch was even done. These pancakes were filling, inexpensive, and surprisingly fun to eat, especially for kids who loved anything they could pick up with their hands. Adults appreciated the practicality of turning leftovers into something delicious. The dish did not try to impress, but it always delivered comfort. Even today, people crave those warm, crispy pancakes because they carry the memory of simple meals served with quiet pride. They tasted like resourcefulness, familiarity, and the joy of discovering that leftovers could be just as good the second time around. Creamed corn made from canned corn and evaporated milk became the sweet, creamy side dish that children especially loved, prepared from affordable ingredients that most households kept in pantries. Black mothers would drain canned corn, then simmer it with evaporated milk, butter, or margarine, and a touch of sugar until it thickened into rich, creamy consistency. Some added a sprinkle of black pepper for contrast, while others kept it sweet and simple to please children who might reject more complex flavors. The evaporated milk created richness without requiring expensive heavy cream, making this dish accessible even to families on tight budgets. A single can of corn could be stretched to serve 8 people when prepared this way, and most families needed only 3 or 4 cans for Thanksgiving gatherings. The dish was make-ahead friendly, reheating beautifully without separating or losing its creamy texture. Baked chicken legs with paprika were the kind of simple oven meal every family seemed to know by heart. The chicken legs were seasoned with salt, pepper, and a heavy dusting of paprika that turned the skin a deep red as it baked. They cooked low and slow, filling the house with that unmistakable smell of roasted chicken that drifted through every room. The skin crisped just enough, the meat stayed juicy, and the seasoning tasted familiar and warm. Families served it with mashed potatoes, rice, or whatever vegetable was around that week, but the chicken always stole the show. It was inexpensive, reliable, and delicious, the kind of dish that never tried too hard but always delivered. Kids grabbed it with both hands, adults savored the flavor, and everybody ended up licking their fingers. Even now, people crave that paprika-dusted chicken because it tasted like family, like evening routines, like the kind of homemade meal that anchors a childhood. Red velvet cake arrived at Black church Christmas dinners as a towering masterpiece of crimson layers and cream cheese frosting that made everyone pause before the first slice was cut. The cake's deep red color came from cocoa powder reacting with buttermilk and vinegar, though some church mothers added food coloring to achieve the most vibrant shade. The batter was mixed carefully to achieve a texture that was neither too dense nor too light, and the layers were baked in well-greased pans that had seen decades of holiday baking. Cream cheese frosting, tangy and sweet, was spread generously between layers and across the entire cake, sometimes decorated with pecans or coconut flakes. The cake was often displayed prominently on a cake stand, its beauty admired before anyone dared to cut into it. Children stared at the red layers with wonder, and adults remembered their own mothers and grandmothers making this same cake for generations. Red velvet was celebration itself, made visible. Fried haddock with tartar sauce was the Friday night ritual that made the end of the week feel special even when money was tight. Families bought haddock because it was affordable, mild, and easy to cook, the kind of fish even picky kids would eat without a fight. The fillets were dusted with flour or dipped in a simple batter, then lowered gently into hot oil where they crisped into a golden, flaky piece of comfort. The sound of frying filled the kitchen with the promise of something warm and satisfying. Tartar sauce, usually made from mayonnaise and chopped pickles, added a creamy tang that made the whole plate taste like a restaurant meal without the cost of going out. Kids loved how the crust crackled when they bit into it. Adults loved how reliable and filling it was after a long week. Sometimes it came with a side of coleslaw or potatoes, but the fish was always the star. The meal felt like a small celebration, a tiny break from the routine, something that said you made it through another week. Even now, people crave that simple plate because it carried a sense of comfort, tradition, and the steady rhythm of family life. Fried haddock dinners tasted like warmth, togetherness, and the peaceful feeling of a Friday evening that asked nothing more of you. Cornmeal rolls made when wheat flour ran short provided the golden, slightly sweet bread that soaked up gravy while stretching limited baking supplies into enough bread for everyone. Black mothers would combine cornmeal with whatever wheat flour remained, creating hybrid rolls that had distinctive texture and flavor, unlike purely wheat-based versions. The cornmeal added slight grittiness and natural sweetness that children found appealing, while the golden color made them look more special than plain white rolls. These rolls required less kneading than traditional bread, making them accessible to cooks with limited time or experience. A single batch using mostly cornmeal could feed 20 people, while using only a fraction of the expensive wheat flour that pure rolls would require. The rolls were best served warm when their texture was softest, though they also held up well for next-day turkey sandwiches. Cream chip potatoes were a full dinner disguised as a side dish, something families made when the pantry was nearly empty, but the expectation of a warm meal still stood. Potatoes were sliced, boiled until just soft, then folded into a simple cream sauce that turned everything silky and comforting. It was not flashy or colorful, but it was filling, warm, and dependable. The sauce coated every piece, turning the dish into a milky, tender scoop of pure comfort that tasted far richer than its ingredients suggested. Families served it on its own or with a biscuit or two, letting the potatoes carry the whole meal. Kids often underestimated it until they took a bite, only to realize how satisfying it was. Adults relied on it because it stretched ingredients beautifully. Even today, the memory of those creamy potatoes lingers because it was the kind of food that kept people going with nothing more than simplicity and care. Kidney bean chili stretchers were a budget version of chili that relied heavily on beans and only a small handful of beef. Mothers browned just enough meat to add flavor, then added onions, canned tomatoes, and kidney beans, letting everything simmer into a thick stew. The beans softened and absorbed the seasoning, creating a dish that tasted rich despite its simplicity. Chili powder or pepper gave the pot warmth, turning the meal into comfort food that stretched across several days. Served over rice or with cornbread, it filled stomachs quickly. Kids loved how hearty it felt, never noticing how little meat was actually in the pot. The pot often stayed on the stove for multiple meals, each reheating, deepening the flavor. Mothers loved that it fed everyone without stress, making a single can of beans go much further than expected. It was the kind of meal that stretched time as much as ingredients. Kidney bean chili stretchers were survival disguised as celebration. Canned mackerel croquettes were the ocean's answer to tight budgets. A can of mackerel, a handful of breadcrumbs, and some chopped onion turned into golden patties fried crisp in a pan. They were fish cakes for people who could not afford fresh catch but still wanted flavor and protein. The smell of frying mackerel filled the kitchen, sharp but familiar, the kind of scent that let the whole block know supper was on. Served with rice or white bread, they made a complete meal. Leftovers were rare, but when they happened, they were tucked into sandwiches for lunch the next day. It was humble food, but with every crunch came a sense of pride. Poor families made it work, turning canned fish into something that tasted like success. It was not about luxury, it was about love and knowing how to make a dollar stretch as far as a meal could go. The sizzling oil, the golden crust, the careful flip of the spatula, it all felt like ceremony. Kids stood by, waiting for their turn, eyes following every move. Even when times were rough, the sound of frying croquettes promised that life could still taste good. Stewed okra with cornmeal dumplings was a dish that blended frugality with comfort in a way that stuck with families for decades. Okra, often grown in backyard gardens, went into a simmering pot with onions, tomatoes, and broth until it softened into a thick stew. My grandmother would mix simple cornmeal batter, drop spoonfuls into the bubbling pot, and let the dumplings cook until they puffed into tender bites. The texture of the okra thickened the stew naturally, giving it body without needing flour or cream. Each bowl carried the flavor of the garden, earthy and sustaining, with dumplings that filled the stomachs of tired workers. It was food that came straight from the soil and stretched further than its ingredients suggested. Children grew up eating this dish as a matter of routine, yet it became part of the rhythm of survival. In the 1960s, stewed okra with cornmeal dumplings was a staple that represented both thrift and ingenuity, turning humble vegetables and flour into something worthy of pride at the dinner table. Fried chicken livers were the brave man's dinner, rich and strong in taste. They were cheap, sold in bulk, and packed with nutrients that families needed. Dipped in flour, seasoned with salt and pepper, and fried until crisp, they were crunchy outside and tender inside. The smell alone filled a kitchen with the sense of abundance, even when money was scarce. Some ate them with rice, others with bread, and always with pride. They were a reminder that flavor and dignity could be found in the most overlooked places. In small kitchens across the South, they sizzled in hot oil while families talked about their day, each sound of frying echoing like a heartbeat. The taste was bold, earthy, and unmistakably homegrown. Children wrinkled their noses at first, but always came around after the first bite. It was food that made you grateful for what you had and proud of what you could create. Black-eyed peas and stewed tomatoes were an inexpensive pairing that offered both protein and comfort. The peas were simmered first, softening in a pot of water with onions or a scrap of fat for extra flavor. As they cooked, the broth turned creamy and earthy, creating a base that tasted rich even without meat. Stewed tomatoes were added near the end, bringing acidity and sweetness that balanced the earthiness of the peas. Mothers often seasoned it with pepper or garlic powder to deepen the flavor. The mixture was spooned over rice or eaten with cornbread, filling the stomach in a way that felt grounding and complete. Kids liked the bright color and the mild, comforting taste. The dish was warm, reliable, and deeply nourishing. It was a simple meal, but never a disappointing one. Black-eyed peas and stewed tomatoes were survival food with soul. Oven-baked meatballs with grape jelly sauce were one of those wonderfully strange creations that somehow tasted magical to a child in the 1960s. The meatballs started out ordinary enough, rolled from ground beef, breadcrumbs, and a splash of milk, then baked on a sheet until they browned at the edges. But the magic happened with the sauce, a glossy mixture of grape jelly and tomato-based ingredients that melted into something sweet, tangy, and strangely irresistible. The smell alone could pull kids into the kitchen to peek in the oven window, waiting for the moment the sauce began to bubble and thicken. The coating clung to each meatball, turning them into shiny bites of pure nostalgia. Adults appreciated how easy and inexpensive the dish was, while kids loved how the sweetness made dinner feel fun. It was the kind of meal that fit perfectly into potlucks, weeknights, and birthday parties, always earning empty plates and sticky fingers. Even today, people still crave that unexpected blend of flavors because it reminds them of a time when dinners did not need to make sense to be delicious. They just needed to feel joyful, familiar, and made with a little love. Biscuits made fresh on Thanksgiving morning became the warm, buttery bread that mopped up gravy and made every bite more satisfying, prepared from basic ingredients that most kitchens already had. Black mothers mixed flour, baking powder, salt, and lard into simple dough that baked into flaky, tender biscuits, golden on top and soft inside. The key was handling the dough gently and not overworking it, lessons passed down from grandmothers who'd perfected biscuit making through decades of practice. A single batch using 5 pounds of flour produced enough biscuits to feed 20 people with leftovers for turkey sandwiches the next day. Some women brushed the tops with melted margarine for extra richness, while others kept them plain to let the flaky layers speak for themselves. Children would sneak biscuits while they cooled, unable to resist that combination of buttery exterior and steamy interior. Fried bologna steaks were the kind of dinner that proved you did not need expensive meat to feel like you were eating something special. Thick-cut slices of bologna hit the pan with a sizzle, curling at the edges as the heat transformed them from simple lunch meat into something smoky, savory, and downright irresistible. Families would score the edges so they stayed flat, pressing them down like a short-order cook working the grill at a busy diner. Once browned and sizzling, those slices went onto a plate beside potatoes or toast, turning an ordinary night into something that tasted hearty and satisfying. The smell drifted through the whole house, warm and salty and impossible to ignore. Kids loved watching the slices puff up, adults loved how far a single pack could stretch, and everyone loved how it tasted a lot fancier than it actually was. It was thrift done right, the kind that created a meal so memorable you still think about it decades later. No matter how simple the ingredients were, fried bologna steaks felt like real food, the kind of meal that told you everything was going to be okay. Hoppin' John appeared at Black church Christmas dinners as a dish carrying spiritual symbolism and Southern practicality in every spoonful. The combination of black-eyed peas, rice, and smoked pork traced its roots to West African and Gullah food traditions, where rice and beans were dietary staples. Church mothers soaked the peas overnight, then simmered them slowly with onions, garlic, bay leaves, and whatever smoked meat was available until the broth turned rich. The rice was cooked separately and mixed in just before serving, each grain absorbing the smoky, savory liquid. Eating Hoppin' John at Christmas prepared congregations for New Year's Day, when the dish was believed to bring good luck, the peas symbolizing coins and the greens served alongside representing paper money. Leftovers were never wasted, but transformed into Skippin' Jenny, a sign of frugality that was itself considered virtuous. This dish stretched to feed large families and proved that humble ingredients could carry deep cultural meaning. Chicken wing stew was one of those meals that would surprise modern ears, since wings were once the cheapest part of the bird. My grandmother bought them in bulk when she could, piling them into pots with onions, celery, and carrots. Slowly simmered, the wings gave up their fat and flavor, turning thin broth into rich gravy. She thickened it with flour or cornstarch, serving it hot over rice or bread to stretch it even further. It was messy eating, but no one complained because the taste was so comforting. Wings may be prized today, but in the 1960s they were scraps, turned into nourishment by clever hands. She said every part of the bird had value if you treated it with respect. Chicken wing stew carried the spirit of thrift, transforming what others dismissed into something that filled the house with warmth. It was proof that good cooking did not depend on wealth, only patience and care. Boiled potatoes with canned meat was the kind of dinner that taught people how to survive on imagination alone. It did not matter whether the can said Spam, Vienna sausages, or potted meat, whatever was on sale or left on the shelf was enough. Potatoes were boiled soft until they nearly fell apart, then mashed together with slices of salty meat that glistened in the pan. The smell was simple but comforting, a mix of salt and starch that spoke of home. The dish filled bellies fast, which was all that mattered when money was low and appetites were big. Some added onions or a bit of grease to give it life. Others poured the leftover liquid from the can into the pot for flavor. Every version was different, but every version told the same story, making the best out of the least. Families gathered around chipped plates, grateful for something warm after a long day. The sizzle of meat hitting the pan was a small victory against hunger. Children did not care where it came from. It was dinner, it was hot, and it was theirs. Those canned goods were the quiet heroes of the kitchen, turning a bare pantry into a meal that tasted like endurance. Poverty might have taken choices, but it never took pride, and nothing proved that better than a pot of boiled potatoes and canned meat cooked with heart. Chicken backs and necks gumbo was the kind of dish that came from deep knowledge, the kind mothers inherited from generations who knew how to stretch poultry scraps into something extraordinary. Backs and necks were the cheapest parts of the bird, often sold for pennies. Mothers browned them, added a dark roux, and slowly layered in vegetables like celery, onions, and bell pepper. The gumbo simmered for hours, building flavor until the whole house smelled like Sunday even on a weekday. Sometimes a leftover bone or a tiny bit of sausage went in, just to deepen the broth served over rice. It became a feast built from scraps. Children never realized how inexpensive it was. They only knew how good it tasted. It warmed the belly, lifted the spirit, and made even the leanest pantry feel full. Chicken backs and necks gumbo was survival turned into heritage. Spam and fried potatoes was the sort of meal that turned thrift into something craveable. Spam cubes hit the skillet with a hiss, browning into salty, crispy little bites that tasted far richer than their priced potatoes sliced thin and cooked alongside them soaked up every bit of flavor, turning golden at the edges and soft in the center. It was a skillet meal that came together fast, fed everyone well, and filled the house with a smell that was impossible to forget. Families made it because it was easy, cheap, and satisfying, but they kept making it because it tasted like home. The combination of textures, the crackle of the potatoes, and the deep savory bite of the spam all worked together better than anyone expected. Kids saw it as a treat, adults saw it as practical, and everyone saw it as a kind of magic born from a can and a pan. Even today, people crave it because it tasted like childhood, like simpler times, and like pure comfort. Pound cake baked with margarine instead of butter became the golden, dense dessert that could be sliced thin to feed many people from a single loaf. Black mothers would cream margarine with sugar and eggs, adding flour gradually to create batter that baked into cake with tight crumb and rich flavor despite lacking expensive butter. The cake lasted for days when wrapped properly, actually improving in texture as it sat. A single pound cake could yield 24 thin slices when cut carefully, making it remarkably economical for providing dessert for large gatherings. Some women glazed their cakes with simple sugar icing, while others served them plain or with berries when fruit was affordable. Children loved pound cake because it was sweet without being overwhelming, while adults appreciated its versatility. Pound cake proved that basic ingredients could create impressive results. Sloppy joes on soft white buns were the messy miracle of school nights everywhere. Ground beef simmered in a sweet, tangy sauce until it thickened into that unmistakable mixture that dripped out of the bun no matter how carefully you tried to hold it. The smell alone meant excitement because sloppy joes felt fun in a way few dinners did. Kids loved the chaos, parents loved the convenience, and everyone loved how satisfying it was. The softness of the bun, the sweetness of the sauce, the savory meat all came together in a way that still makes people nostalgic decades later. It was a dinner that tasted like childhood laughter, like sticky hands, like evenings where life felt uncomplicated and full. And there was always this unspoken ritual to it, the way families leaned over their plates to avoid dropping sauce everywhere and still managed to make a small mess anyway. That was part of the charm. Sloppy joes brought everyone to the table faster than anything else, and for a brief moment the whole house felt connected by something simple and warm. Fried catfish appeared at black church Christmas dinners as a beloved tradition that united entire congregations around fellowship tables. The fish were often caught by church members themselves from local rivers and ponds, cleaned carefully and soaked in buttermilk to remove any muddy taste. Fillets were dredged in seasoned cornmeal mixed with cayenne, garlic powder, and paprika, then fried in hot peanut oil until the exterior turned golden and crispy while the flesh inside stayed white and flaky. The smell of frying catfish drew families from across the church grounds, and the sound of sizzling oil became the soundtrack of Christmas celebration. Served with hot sauce, always Louisiana or Crystal brand, and slices of white bread for sopping, fried catfish transformed a simple fish into a feast. Leftovers were eaten cold the next day between bread slices, extending the joy of fellowship beyond the dinner itself. This dish proved that abundance could come from rivers and creeks when grocery money was scarce. Canned sardines with crackers and mustard were the no-cook meal that kept hunger away when the stove stayed cold. It was the supper of night shifts, factory breaks, and long days that never seemed to end. You peeled back the tin, spread the fish on saltines, added a dab of mustard, and called it dinner. It was sharp, salty, and strangely comforting. People who ate this did not care about appearances. They cared about surviving another day. The tang of mustard, the crunch of crackers, the oil of the sardines. It all came together in quiet satisfaction. It was the food of those who refused to quit. In a world that gave them little, they made do with what they had and made it taste like perseverance. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and onion were a dish that stretched garden vegetables into something filling and satisfying. Bell peppers were inexpensive when in season, and my grandmother made the most of them by stuffing each with seasoned rice, onions, and sometimes a bit of tomato. Meat was optional and often absent, but the rice itself carried enough substance to make the meal complete. The peppers were baked until tender, their skins blistering slightly while the rice absorbed every bit of flavor. Each stuffed pepper became its own little meal, portioned perfectly for children and adults alike. The aroma of roasted peppers and onions filled the house, signaling comfort even when budgets were stretched thin. It was a dish that looked impressive despite being made from humble ingredients, and it reminded families that presentation mattered too. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and onion carried both thrift and pride, proving that even in hard times, dinner could be hearty, healthy, and beautiful on the table. Which unwritten recipe do you wish you could bring back? Drop it in the comments and share your family's kitchen memories. Hit like and subscribe so we can keep preserving these flavors before they disappear completely.